Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ant from Ant's Retro Game Armory. So today we're going to do another GB Studio tutorial regarding a heads-up display with some math functions, tile switching mixed in, as well as setting variables to certain values. So this is my game Portrait of Vondrak. It is a micro-platformer in which you play as a kind of vampire, bounty hunter, thief guy, and you're looking through the Caligari mansion for vampire treasure. So with this game, one thing I wanted to do is to not tell the player so much through text and dialogue, but to show them. So being as my levels are just one screen on Game Boy, I was able to put a heads-up display on each level. So that's at the bottom here. So I'll zoom in on that. So I have a lot of variables I need to keep track of for this game, so I'll briefly explain those. The first one is time. So as the player moves around the level, the time will go down. And when the time goes down, a vampire will basically jump out and chase you and try to kill you. So that leads to your health, which is denoted here. So if you are attacked by the vampire, you start losing health. And if you actually fall into one of the pits, you'll pretty much die instantly. So once you go through the playthrough of Portrait of Vondrak, you'll be able to see that. So the other thing I want to keep track of is the number of cross bolts that the player has. So that's here. This icon is basically how many vampires he's killed. So I'm still working through this game as a full game, but I'm going to use that later on in the game when the player gets towards the end. This is going to come back into play. So the player won't know that at the time, but if he kind of kills the vampires instead of evading them, there's going to be an effect on him later on. And the last one is basically the amount of valuables he's stolen or the amount of cash that he has. So that's denoted here. This one is simply for the map to remind the player if they want to push select, they can see what room they're in on the map. So I might do a separate video on that. It's really easy to do. So this is the heads-up display for the player. So this is going to be constantly displayed through every level. And I wanted to explain how you might set that up. So this is a micro platformer. I made it a little easy on myself. Like I said, it's only one screen. So it's a little bit easier. There's ways to, if you're using a 2D game, you can pin this to the corner, which there's other videos on that out there on YouTube. And additionally, there's an easier way when you're doing a side scroller using the parallax that will keep a heads-up display in place. So I may make another video on that. So I'll go ahead and show you what needs to be done here. So this is the third level, but we'll hop down to the first level to make it a little more clear. So the first setup, there's important setup things here that you need to do. So if you're going to use a heads-up display, the boxes that you want to switch your numbers have to be unique boxes to the scene that you're using. They have to be the only type of box with that layout in this scene, which is not too hard. You just make a random symbol with it. That's what I do, and it will be the only one on there. It's really, as long as you don't copy and paste it, you shouldn't have an issue. So that's an important thing. And your variables, I believe, also need to be global. I pretty much do that anyway, but I needed to do that with this one because the variables would carry between levels, so I needed that global variable. But you also need a graphic like this that has the numbers that you want. These are all 8x8 tiles. So these are the numbers that I want. So basically I want to cap my guy's thefts at $100. So I did not continue. It gets pretty hard to fit 3 numbers in there. But I've had it set up so he won't exceed 100. So what needs to happen once you have those kind of setup things done is you want to set the variables that you want to a number. So I'll show you how I did that. So it's really done in this scene here. This is like the first scene. And it's really within this box right here. I just called that boot up. So I want the player to have 10 lives, 30 arrows or bolts. FAK is the number of vampires they killed, and the cash. So this is just kind of like your backpack, right, for this. This sets the variables. It sets the values for the variables. So that command is just shown here. Set variable to value. You guys are probably all familiar with that. And then you hit your variable and you hit your number. It's too easy. So in each level here, I want to have the player to have a certain time. So on init, for this one, there's a time. And I wanted to make sure, this was a testing thing, that this happened. In addition, I believe there's scenes where the player will come back to this first scene instead of that outdoor scene. So I copied that here. But anyway, time is also going to be set to 20. Time is also going to be set to 20. So this being the first level, we can easily move through while the time is 20. And you get a feel for the game doing that. So we have our variables set. Now we need to get them on the level for the player to see. So how do we do that? We need to do two things. Once the level boots up, which you guys know that's on init or on initiation, we want the numbers to populate. And then we need to do a couple things as we move. The time's going to go down. As we shoot an arrow, the arrows are going to go down. When we get hurt, the health is going to go down. If we hit a vampire, the vampire count's going to go up. And if we collect something, the cash is going to go up. So when we first start the level, we need to make sure the numbers that we want populate. So on init of my scene, I have call script heads up display updates. So I like to use that since I don't have to keep copying this script. So I have HUD updates right here. So what is that saying? That says on initiation, we're going to replace the tile at 217, which is right here. And we're going to use this code. This code basically you can copy and paste, but we're going to use this number scene, and we're going to keep track of the variable time. So we set that to 20. That's telling this, what this script is telling it to do is pull the number 20 off of this sheet and put it here so the player can see it. So it's the same thing with all of them. Lives, we're going to do replace tile at 617. We're going to use this sheet, it's all just the numbers, and we're going to use lives, and that follows through with bolts, vampire kills, and cash. But I store that in a script, and then all I do on init, I call that script. So once the scene initiates, this script runs and fills in all these numbers. So let's go back to our scene. Alright, too easy. So once the player hops into that scene, everything will be filled in. So the way I keep track of my variables now is doing two things: math functions and an update, an on update script with these blank players over here. So we have scripts for buttons. Okay, that's another script I wrote. So this affects these variables. So I have attached script to up, down, left, right, A. So every time the player moves, the so-called time, which is really just movements, subtracts 1, and I clamp that value between 0 and 225 for two reasons. You can't really have negative time, but in addition, my numbers end at time, and when the time hits 0, this vampire jumps out, tries to chase you. So that's what I want. Because if it was on updating and it went negative, I don't believe it would work. So this is your scripts for your buttons. So I'm starting to do math functions. So type in math functions, you can do all kinds of stuff. but this one is subtract value 1 in this case. Pretty easy. Okay, attach script to B button. This one's a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. So what I have set up here, when I press B, I want to be able to shoot one of his bolts. So I have an if-then statement saying if the bolts equal 0, please don't do anything. If not, launch a projectile, and I have everything programmed in. And also subtract 1 bolt. Another math function. Pretty easy. So, those are 2 math functions that are going to be switching these values out. So that was time, and that was bolts. So let's go over to health. So that's in a different area. That is on player hit. So this is a platformer, so player hit's going to come up. And I have that stored right over here. So I have scripts kind of organized by player and vampire. So on player hit, it's another if-then statement, because if he hits 0, I want him to die. So I want him to flip over to this scene pretty much. And depending on how much money you have, you can buy your way back. So definitely check out the demo if you want to hear more about that. But anyway, so basically if the player and the vampire collide, or the player gets hit by something, if his lives equal 0, it's going to go to that scene, spooky scene. If not, lives are going to subtract 1. Same deal. And I have a little shake on here. And an emote just to give the player an indication that he was hit. Clamp between 0 and 225. Alright, so the 2 we have left are vampire kills and your cash. So while this one is affected by when the player gets hit, this one is affected when the vampire gets hit. So I have vampire hit. Okay, first I want to kill my vampire. And I'm going to add FAK, or vampire kills, plus 1. Very easy. And then this is all to set the palettes back. So when the vampire jumps out, palettes turn red. And when he gets killed, it goes back to the regular DMG colors. So that is what occurs. And you can basically freely run away at that point. So that's vampire kills, and then cash is very easy. You have these little valuables here, which the player's collecting. So when it says, when it gets hit by the player, deactivate self and add a value of cash. So on my note sheet here, I have what things are worth more money. This one's worth $1. So that will add 1 there. So that's how the math functions work. Now to get those tiles updated, you have to use the same tile switching lineup that we did on init. Pretty much HUD updates. You have to have an actor, which I just like to use a blank actor whose sole job is to do this. You have to use an actor that is going to be updating that heads-up display. You could use one of these other ones, but I just like to have it separate. So wait for 1 frame. That's to give the game a little bit of a break as far as computing, kind of like computing power, if you will. You don't want the game to lag pretty much. So I let it wait 1 frame. It doesn't affect it at all. So once again, on update, so you guys know what on update means. It's basically checking 30 times a second on this script. And this is what updates the tiles as you go. So you automatically see a update to your heads-up display because of this script. So it's the same one we used before, which is handy. You don't have to keep copy and pasting that 5-piece script every time you want to use it. So that's how the heads-up display works. Once again, this is more of a simple version, but that is how you get the values. That's how you get them to display when you first start the scene, and that is how you get them to update as you go. So really briefly show you what that looks like. So as I said, when I first started making some games, I was pretty focused on dialogue, but for this game I wanted to actually show the player stuff instead of telling them things. Alright guys, so we'll quickly play through the level. So I haven't moved yet, haven't used any time, but I wanted to show you how the numbers popped up due to the on-init script. So 20, 10, 30, 0 kills, and 0 cash. So let's test some of these out real quick. You can see as I move, time goes down, that's good. And as I press B here, a little arrow comes out. It's dropping our bolts, which is good. So every time I jump, it's good. Dropped a so-called time, and it's kind of weird, so I named that time, but I really wanted the player to be able to look at the level before they move, so it's kind of a different thing. You can always make a timer on there, which I haven't done yet. But the other variables here, I'll show you. Kind of run into the coffin, you take a hit. So now we're at 9. And if we get a candelabra here, you see we got $1 there. So the only thing left to test out is this right here. So I hit 0 time. That's another on update. And the vampire jumped out at me. So I decided to kill him. So my vampire kills went up to 1. Good. And now I can walk over. So the other thing you can do in this game, which we'll talk about during the playthrough, is kind of run away from the vampires. So you can make that choice, but it gets a little more complicated. In that case, I had nowhere to go, and I didn't want to get injured or hurt. So another example here of the level. So we popped in here with the same variables that we had in the last level. Like I said, these are global variables, so they carried over to the next level. And then this time I set the time for 15, and I already used 1. So as you can see, every time I'm pressing the buttons here, I'm using up time, but I collected up another valuable, so I got another $1. This is kind of what happens when time hits 0. So I have, like I said, that's another on update script I have going. So this is a heads up display. Just want to show you guys that. We'll be doing a playthrough either before or after this of Portrait of Vondrak micro platformer. So I hope you guys found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Thanks.